viongozi wengine wana criticize, inakuwa ngumu kuelezea. Tungependa waelezee serikali nini wanajua kuhusu hii insecurity, the current insecurity in Lamu, and why are they criticizing security programs za serikali. Wale vijana wako msituni, what is it they know that the government doesn't know? Kwa nini hawataki serikali ingie kwa huu msitu? What is so special in that forest? Yet kuna vijana wamewekwa mule, wanalishwa, wanakuwa protected, wanapewa maji, wanapewa chakula, wanakuwa financed. Who is doing this?
Nimemsikia tena leo Marwa akitoa statement. Anasema Lamu kuna wanasiasa ambao wanafanya maajabu ajabu. Sisi hatutaki kuona sura yako ukituambia wanasiasa wanafanya maajabu. Tunataka kuone serikali imechukua hatua gani kulinda maisha wa Mkenya aliyeko kule Lamu. Hatutaki press conference. Hatutaki press conference. Tunataka tuone umechukua hatua. Kama kuna mwanasiasa mpeleke korokoroni haraka, mnangoja nini?
Simiu, that's the politics of what's happening in Lamu. Yes. So the Coast Regional Coordinator, Nelson Marwa, says he thinks, there's something fishy happening. There could be a political hand in the violence we're seeing there. What do you think?
I think before I get to that, I wanted to tell Mr. Wino one thing, which he knows. I mentioned about propaganda. Then he said he cannot come here and talk propaganda. Propaganda is an art of war. And if Al-Shabaab are making people believe there are 200, we are fighting Al-Shabaab. We are not talking to them. So propaganda is an art of war. I'm not saying he should come here and cheat, but we cannot allow them to be cheating Kenyans and the world, yet we have the capacity to counter what they have. So that is just what I wanted to mention. It is not wrong to play a propaganda war. It is an art of war, which we must accept, we must play within. Now, let me come to Mr. Marwa. I have nothing personal against Mr. Marwa. But Mr. Marwa has had 4 regional police coordinators. 4. Within the time he's been at the coast. So you must ask yourselves, why are these officers being changed so frequently, yet these are the people Mr. Marwa is supposed to be working with? Number 2, I think we have a special officer in charge of the operation in Lamu. That is the person Mr. Marwa should be talking to. You see, if the government has decided they have appointed Simiyu to be in charge of the Lamu anti-terror operation, that is the person Mr. Marwa should be dealing with in terms of issues of Lamu. Yes, we know the police have an overarching responsibility to ensure that people are safe and secure in Lamu, but we have a special officer appointed by the government who is in charge of the Lamu operations. That to me is a person Mr. Marwa should be dealing with directly in terms of Lamu counter-terror issues. But when it comes to issues of general security matters, then he has an officer who is the regional coordinator. I think the police have just posted Mr. Larry Kieng or something. The 4th one. Yeah. In a very short time. The 4th one. So we need to be asking ourselves, what is it with the costs that we don't have senior officers staying there working with Mr. Marwa? And every time we hear about him, he's either blaming the police as collaborators, he's now blaming politicians, he's now blaming everybody. I think on matters of national security, Mr. Marwa should deal with people who are in charge of security issues. We know he's the chairperson, but when it comes to issues like those, we expect him to have dealt with his officers on the ground, so that when he comes to speak to Kenyans about politicians, then he has some facts that he can share and release the same information that he thinks he has to people who are supposed to implement.
But you're already concluding that the information he has is not right in any way. Perhaps. No,
I'm not concluding that. Just before he says, I'm not concluding that. We know there's something they call interagency. But you see, within this framework of interagency, the lead agency is always the police. So everything else they decide around this the person to implement the resolutions of this interagency framework is the police. So at the end of the day, we expect Mr. Marwa to be handing over these things to the police to deal with what he is telling Kenyans, as opposed to him coming out and speaking to the media, and yet we know there's an agency that is supposed to deal with this and tell Kenyans this is how things are moving.
And the politicians are picking it up. You've heard what the governor said. Arrest a politician if you know this is a person that is actually working with the terrorists. They're picking it up. And remember, even after Mpeketoni, we had the same story. People said this attack is political, and it ended up being something else.
First of all, I think we need to listen clearly to what Mr. Marwa said. He has raised concerns. One of the concerns he has raised is he's saying that there are people, according to him, that are in Boni Forest, and that Wanalishwa, and that some politicians don't want these people to be moved. And that is what he started with.
Wanalishwa meaning they're being funded?
No, being fed.
So it's not
and if you look at how he started complaining that why are we removing people, it tells you the mind of what Marwa was talking about. The regional coordinator, cross-regional coordinator, Mr. Marwa was talking about, he was raising concerns that some people do not want the security agencies to get into the forest. And maybe that is why people are being told not to go too far, but they were still going too far, Malishoni, staying in those places. So he was simply raising a concern. Who are these people? And that is why you see from that moment he said we are going to move into Lamu. We are going to move into Boni. And he personally went to Boni and said we are going to move people in some of the areas that we want to get into, so that he can find out who are these people. And I think that is the process that the regional coordinator is saying. Secondly, he has a right to address the press on issues of security. He's the chairman of the security committee for the coast region. Whatever people discuss and agree on, he has the right to discuss about it. So you cannot come up and say, why is Marwa raising up issues? It's within his right. He can do that. But lastly, before we get into that, I want us to remind ourselves, people forget so fast. We had problems in this town and in Mombasa, where we had hand grenades every day. We were getting hit left and right. Mr. Murunga, don't forget, at least we need a pat on our back to say we have done a good job.
Right.
And if an incident occurs in Lamu and it seems to be tricky, you talked about geopolitics, then you understand the environmental position of Lamu, that we have a forest, a very huge forest in Lamu. It's not a small forest. It covers a very long distance. It has rivers at a certain point. And the terrain is very tricky. And you're a military officer and you understand this. In my mother tongue, we say, it is not mchezo wa watoto, as we may take it. And also you must also understand that we are also dealing with an area that has settlements. People are living in this particular place. And therefore we must handle it in a more tactful way. Also remember, Kenyans are very tricky people. Any moment you deploy military to support police, a lot of question marks arise. And it is because nobody takes his time to go and even read the military act and get to understand at what time would the military be there to support the police. For your information, he knows the firepower of the police cannot be equivalent to that of the military because of the role that the military has been given and the role of the police. Today, the numbers of police are higher than the numbers of the military. If you give police a higher or an equivalent power, they can overrun military. And that is not the objective and the organization.
And for this specific case,